Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Laura in the studio.
It's Paddy in the studio.
And it's 6 minutes past 2 on Saturday, the 8th of March. And there is, of course, news happening, as there always is on the weekends. So if this is your daily diet of what's going on in the world, we'll just give you some of today's headlines. There have been yet more strikes in Ukraine overnight. The authorities say at least 20 people have been killed. 8 residential buildings have been reportedly damaged following strikes in Donetsk.
And what you're seeing is this reset as Donald Trump appears to favour dealing with Russia over Ukraine. It's taken everyone by surprise. Some people say that's proof that we weren't listening correctly in the last 6 months of what the president has been saying, but that's another newscast. And recently, the Washington, D.C. powers have withdrawn access to information, including satellite imagery of the battlefield.
And that sounds like it's something quite matter of fact. But actually, in context, America has been Ukraine's biggest allies in the 3 years of this war. They've been withdrawing vital information that many people would say has not just helped Ukraine set its tactics on the battlefield, has helped them hold off the Russian forces after their illegal invasion, but also has helped save lives. So these have been big, big moves in the last 7 days since you and I were together in these seats last weekend. Actually real changes in America's attitude towards Ukraine, not just rhetoric. Although in classic Trump style yesterday, he said he was strongly considering big sanctions against Russia. So as ever, the White House, maybe because they enjoy it, maybe because he changes his mind a lot, but they are definitely keeping people guessing.
Incidentally, you just used the phrase biggest ally. I think we could say biggest single country, because the contribution of Europe has been bigger.
Yes.
But that's all the countries of Europe.
100%.
So it's an important distinction, because if Donald Trump himself has been arguing that the US gives more than Europe, but that has been fact-checked. That's not correct. So it's part of the problem we've got here is that we're even arguing over terms.
Indeed, and arguing even over numbers. The president keeps saying $350 billion has gone from the US to Ukraine. That's not true either. So very important to say when black is black and white is white. You're absolutely right. Europe in some has given more, but the US is the biggest single supporter, if you like, or has been. Let's use the past tense right now, has been Ukraine's biggest single supporter all the way up until Trump moved back into the White House. And the reality of decisions that they've taken in the last 7 days, I think, has moved us into a different phase. So phase one, if you like, was all this sort of saber rattling. Oh, we might not have your back. Oh, we might, if you don't going to behave a certain way, we're not going to help you diplomatically. In the last 7 days since we last met, we've seen physical reality of aid being frozen, satellite imagery, and maybe intelligence stopped being shared.
So here's newscaster Jenny.
Hello, Paddy. Hello, Laura. It's Jenny here from Lentwoodine. I'm just wondering, do you think that Starmer's previous role as a human rights lawyer before becoming Prime Minister gives him the ability to read the situation well and understand the other's personality? Does this experience in that role put him in a pole position to help resolve the issues and find peace on this international stage?
Isn't that an interesting question? Well, Jenny, maybe I read Jenny's mind, because in the last few days I've been talking to lots of people who know Starmer well, who work in and around the government, because it was suggested to me a few days ago by a diplomat that Trump might be the best thing that could have happened to Keir Starmer.
Wow.
How could this be when we have a lawyer of the soft left from, North London, as his critics would use to deride him, but which is also, factually true. Son of a toolmaker, left-wing prime minister, back in charge after 14 years of the Tories, stoic, sober, serious, always suited and booted unless he's off to the football in a black polo shirt.
/ dull.
Well, the criticism of him has often been he's dull. What does he stand for? He's a bit of a blank sheet of paper. How could Donald Trump, brash property tycoon who seems to say the first thing that comes into his head, who offends people all over the place, who doesn't seem to care about convention and rules that Mr. Rules on the other side of the Atlantic cares about so much. But how could Donald Trump possibly be a good thing to have happened to Keir Starmer? Well, plenty of his allies think because the crisis internationally has given Keir Starmer a chance to step into the spotlight on the world stage, and he's handled it well, but also that this crisis and the handling of Donald Trump plays exactly to his strengths, to his ability to cut out the noise, focus on what really matters. And having worked with people who've been in extreme circumstances, whether that's victims' families or people who've been involved in very tense legal situations, his ability to get people to focus on what matters and park the emotion and just get to decisions and relentlessly move forward calmly and soberly in a position of high stress. And Jenny, I think you're onto something, because people who know Keir Starmer really well have said to me in the last few days that this moment, not that he would have chosen it, but this moment almost couldn't be better for his skill set, which is an interesting thing.
Well, especially when you put it like that, because you've been calling people who are close to him. I went to the chamber of the House of Commons. I watched Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, and I saw the leader of the opposition say, the Prime Minister is quite right. I saw the leader of the Liberal Democrats with their plump cushions now that they have with all their victory in July 2024. And they want more spending on defence than the government does. So you've got this rare kind of moment of unanimity. Those are the Westminster-based parties that aren't, I'm not talking about Scottish, Northern Ireland and Welsh politics here. I'm talking about the big parties in Westminster. So he's got that. Also, I injected the word dull. That's what the critics say. Do we want a Prime Minister who tweets at midnight a different view than he had at 6 p.m? No, we actually don't.
Well, this is the other thing that is being picked up in polling, and it's been picked up, I'm told, by focus groups, that people are genuinely, not surprisingly, maybe they've been listening to us too much, but many people genuinely feel a bit alarmed by what they've seen. And actually, then in this moment, pollsters have been telling me, and they're very aware of this in government, that actually people appear to be appreciating the Prime Minister's dull/sober, depending which way you want to look at it, personality. So when you have the kind of wildness in the White House makes people feel nervous, actually somebody who comes across as being very sober, very calm, actually can seem to have more of an appeal.
And I was going to put another slash in. And the slash is between international and domestic politics, because, as we've covered here, they had a very bumpy start.
Dreadful start.
Labour had own goal after own goal after own goal. Someone even paid for Keir Starmer's spectacles. So this all happened. They did not achieve a home run on the economy, which they've told us that they need to do. They need growth. Everything hinges on growth. Do we have growth? Well, we have about 0.1 of it. So we've got the slash is between the international scene, all that grinning and gripping, as those photo ops are called, convening meetings, flying around, and what looked like a really, bad beginning as a British government.
And here's what I think we're going to hear from the Prime Minister actually later this week. So Keir Starmer's going to make a big speech, I think, on Thursday. We're both going to be joined by Pat McFadden in our radio and TV studios tomorrow, who's the PM's right-hand man, maybe not a politician who's a massive household name, but somebody incredibly important in government. And what I've heard a lot of from behind the scenes is how the government is trying, partly because Keir Starmer believes it, but also they're very well aware of this political moment, is trying to stitch together the shakiness of what's happening around the world, which is very serious, and also what he identifies as a sense of insecurity for people at home, whether that's about the economy, as you've talked about, whether it's about the insecurity of the roof over your head, if you're one of the people who'd love to buy a house, but you have to rent, whether you're one of the people who's worried about your energy bills. And actually, the government's putting loads of borrowing and investment into homegrown energy, so we're less dependent on the global market. And this concept of security in all its forms, whether you're talking about immigration, whether you're talking about energy, whether you're talking about Ukraine, it's something that was a theme for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves in opposition. But you're really going to start hearing in the coming weeks the Prime Minister try to lean in, I hate that phrase, but the Prime Minister try to tell this story with what's happening around the world and what's happening at home. I think this is fascinating because up until now, Keir Starmer completely rejected the idea that he had to have an ology. He would say, like, I'm not interested in ideology, I'm just interested in what works. What I've been told in the last couple of days is after Christmas, he basically came back from his holiday and started talking more and more about this kind of philosophical set of ideas. in a way that people close to him tell me they just hadn't really heard him speak like that before. He'd always been much more driven by, look, what works, what's practical, what can we do? And it was this kind of almost a new thing for them, seeing him come back and say, yeah, I've been thinking about all this stuff. And it culminated in the writing of this memo. And I think that's really, it's almost like maybe Keir Starmer has developed an ology.
OK, we heard it here first. And we're going to say, Jenny, yours was the first question. It seems to probably like a day ago, given the way that we've wanged on since. But both.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? Or maybe that's just me.
What we're saying is Jenny's right, that to draw a link between the chaotic arrival of Donald Trump, which obviously his White House would say is disruptive and change, putting America
and that's
first.
a good thing, they would say, yeah.
With how the people in the English-speaking world react, because obviously that's us, and Keir Starmer's role, pointed out by Jenny. Thank you for doing that. Now, next question to us is coming on from Irene. Given the huge global and national impact of Trump's actions and plans so far, and the potential damage described in Friday's newscast, can you tell us what's happening in the Democrat Party? What opposition is Trump facing? So can I go back in time for the purposes of this question from Irene? The Democrat Party had a presidential candidate about a year ago who couldn't reliably walk, talk or ride a bicycle. His name was Joe Biden, and he was the incumbent president. It took a long time for the party bigwigs to persuade him to stand aside after a calamitous appearance on the TV debate in which Donald Trump fairly said he had no idea what the sitting president had said.
And don't forget that prominent Democrats like Nancy Pelosi, who we interviewed, sat in chairs opposite people doing our kinds of jobs and said, he's fine, he's completely whip smart, it's all completely under control.
And I introduced this because they should not be given a free ride, the Democrat Party, just because there's things that Donald Trump is being criticised for does not mean this has come out of a vacuum.
No.
This is a choice. And therefore, Democrat Party go into this White House, this new presidency of Donald Trump too, with their faces slapped by the voters.
And maybe that has why there has been a real silence. I think there's been quite a visible, noticeable silence. You can't have a visible silence, can you? What a silly thing to say.
Silence.
An obvious silence from Democrat grandees. So at a moment like this, when the whole security structure of the Western world is up in the air, you might perhaps expect to hear from a former Secretary of State. Who might that be? Hillary Clinton. You might possibly expect to hear from former presidents, given how grave some people believe the situation might be. Who could that be? Perhaps Barack Obama. Have we heard anything from those big Democratic figures? No, we haven't in a big way. Bernie Sanders, the left-wing Democrat, popped up to say how unhappy he was not so long ago. Yeah. But as we talk on Saturday afternoon, there's almost nothing that we can really see.
Well, there's a few there's Congressman Al Green. I interviewed him. He wants to get Donald Trump impeached again. He tried to do this before. He wants to do it again. He wants to go with a grassroots movement of the people. I think he was asked to leave the chamber of the House of Representatives.
Yes.
If you then, going again to Irene's question, if you then go to the pictures of the State of the Union address, the Democrats remained static without applause. So the House was completely divided, which is a very visible way to describe the United States of America for the rest of us anyway. And I worked there. I was an intern in Congress. I've sat in the Speaker's chair and I've been there when I've seen the House stand up different parts of it to support the president. So you have everyone on their feet in order to sing the battle hymn of the Republic, if you like. So I would answer the question that they are in a pickle. However, no one expects the team around Donald Trump not to fall out within months. That's exactly what happens to him. There'll be a schism. And the Democrats will undoubtedly find some more pep. But at the moment, the question is a very apt one.
There doesn't seem to be much sign of pep. But you're right. There has already been some reporting about very stormy scenes between one Elon Musk and some of Trump's cabinet this week. So I think, watch this space for that. Just though, Irene, to give you some of the latest polling. So I've got some information from the Brookings Institute. They're a very august think tank over in the States. And they are giving us the information that nearly all surveys show Trump's support is no higher than the roughly 50% he secured of the popular vote. Surveys overall, according to Brookings, suggest a net decline in his personal approval ratings. Trump's tilt towards Russia is well out of step with the opinions of most rank and file Republicans and Americans as a whole, Brookings say. But his biggest challenge involves souring attitudes towards the economy and what he is, or more to the point, is not doing about it. So interesting. It's also interesting, just to remind you, there are all sorts of stories, and I'm sure our chums on American Cast have been talking about it a lot. There are massive stories running in the US too about what Elon Musk and Donald Trump are doing to federal government, what they're doing under DOGE, the supposed drive for efficiency, which is doing all sorts of very controversial things. Like, that's not a funny, silly thing where Elon Musk posing with a chainsaw is all a big thing for something and giggles. That's a big, serious change. So there are all sorts of other domestic things playing out in the States as well.
So something and giggles is normally a swear word, isn't it?
Maybe.
That rhymes with
Ships and giggles.
Yes. So what we're doing is painting a picture there that no, it's not a one-party state, the United States of America. The executive, that is the presidency, has a lot of power, which Donald Trump is exercising. But to the question posed, no, you will hear increasingly formed arguments from Democrats. There's one from a new senator from the state of Michigan, one of those alleged battleground states.
Elisa Slotkin.
Well,
great name for an American politician.
She should be elected on the name alone, but not for political reasons, Newscast, not for political reasons. And she said that Donald Trump is walking us into a recession. Mm-hmm. So, of course, one of the big independent ratings organisations has increased the prospects of a US recession, as a matter of fact. And that would be a very big issue for the Donald, just as it would be for our government here in the UK, for the reasons we were discussing when we contrasted British politics with international. Now, we now move on to Paul.
That was a very, very, very excellent many-claused sentence, can I just say?
Is it on a par with something and giggles? So we now news
more eloquent than that.
I read the last one, Laura. Do you think you should, out of fairness, read this one?
Paul says, is there not an obvious need for a representative from the Europeans to step forward and talk to Putin? That day was always going to come once Trump started discussions. An obvious candidate to start this is Keir Starmer.
We said on this podcast multiple times, all wars end round the table. The question you ask is, where's the table and who's at the table? So ultimately, the direct answer to this is yes, the Europeans and the Russians are always going to have to talk in the end. Russians are Europeans, forgive me, the bloc in the West that we describe as the Western Europeans. And the question has always been when, because it's land for peace if you go too early. So it's fraught with difficulties. But, Paul, the British government's position is that Donald Trump was right to talk unilaterally to Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. That's the new thing that they reacted to, although we don't know what was in the 90-minute conversation.
We don't. And we also don't know really what the state of any possible discussions between the UK as some kind of broker are with Russia. You know, relationships between Russia and the UK are not good. Yes, there is a Russian ambassador who occasionally does interviews with the likes of us here in London. But the relationship has been very fraught for a long time. And you'll remember there have been various instances of diplomats being kicked out on either side. Of course, this week there's been the huge story about the spy ring in this country. So whether, I mean, gosh, that definitely would be diplomatic history for Starmer making that kind of trip to the Kremlin or talking to Putin. But we'll see.
The gift would appear that we were going in weakness. So the timing of it is everything, Paul. But I would predict to you that in our podcast lifetime, that meeting will happen, before they kick us off. And if they don't, then I'll prove to be wrong. But the basic point being made here is, will these guys have to talk? And of course, they do already sit on the United Nations Security Council, the Americans, the British, the Russians, the French, the Chinese. So inevitably, yes, there are talks that happen. But the big public one about will Sir Keir Starmer meet Vladimir Putin, no one can say that that's going to happen with a date on it.
No, indeed ever. But who knows? We'll watch and see. Talks we do know are going to happen is the US and Ukraine teams are due to meet in Saudi Arabia next week after the much touted minerals deal, which was on and off, then on and off, then on and off. And we think now probably on again. But here's Donna with her question.
I'm really struggling to understand why it is that Zelensky is contemplating signing the minerals agreement with the US. I wonder if European countries could be offered the deal instead. Best wishes.
Well, Donna, he's got to get relations moving with Washington, D.C. He said as much himself because of the calamitous fallout in the White House a few days ago. He can't let it get worse. It appears to have got worse because of the withdrawal of intelligence and satellite imagery. But he was, it was said, prepared to sign a deal.
He told us he would sign it on Sunday night. So he said on the record he would do. And I think the reason he has to is because Ukraine, like the position that so many Western democracies are in, like it or loathe it, they really want to have America's protection and help and support. And even if it feels like a galling thing to have to do, President Zelensky in the end didn't, say, I'm terribly sorry, Donald, but he absolutely did shift his position a little bit to acknowledge more explicitly help from the United States. And, not because that was necessarily a fun thing to do after that terrible humiliation in the Oval Office, but that is the tough, raw realpolitik of this. Ukraine still wants America's help.
Yeah.
European countries believe that Ukraine's future requires security guarantees from America, and that's why it's likely he will sign the deal.
And Donna was saying, could this minerals deal be signed with Europe instead? I have not seen anyone say that's going to happen, Donna. If there is a deal signed on what to do with the various rare earths within Ukraine, the first person that deal will be signed with will be the President of the United States, if it's signed.
What's interesting, though, is Donald Trump has presented this as if having American companies working
is an umbrella.
It would give Ukraine security. There already have been American companies doing lots of work in Ukraine in lots of different industries, and that didn't stop Vladimir Putin invading in the first place. So,
Another aspect,
or maybe he's been watching a lot of Gold Rush.
Well, I mean, the other important thing for one of us to say on the record is viewing this from a mid-American state. You have asked the Europeans to stop fighting each other since sort of 1917. You have done, as America, an awful lot, including sending your youth to die there and be buried there. And I'm sure you and many newscasters will have walked the war graves in France, Belgium and elsewhere. And you see some amazingly young British, Canadian, French, German, of course, but then you see thousands and thousands of Americans. And they are right to ask American voters, when can you guys get hold of this problem? And Donna, they have been asking for a very long time for Europe to get their act together for defence purposes. So it's important not to step away from this question by saying we do get the historical message of Americans saying to Europe, is there a time, I've got a map here of 1,000 years, is there a time when you'll ever be able to stop fighting each other? Is there?
And there's also a really peculiar situation that if you landed on planet Earth, you might think was a really weird thing, that the security of a whole continent has been for a long time dependent on a few thousand votes in a few American swing states. That's quite a peculiar situation. It's arisen for very good historical reasons, as you've just outlined. But we shouldn't be surprised that America is now kicking up over this. It's what Donald Trump said in his first term. He's back doing it with a vengeance in his second term. And it had some effect in his first term in terms of getting European countries to pony up more cash for defence. So it's an interesting thing, but the way in which this argument is playing out at such kind of high voltage is a real reason for people to be nervous, because it's not just about the money, it's about the concepts of mutual self-defense and protection. And ultimately, actually, as a former defense minister was saying to me last week, he just said, look, if this was Reagan, he would have wanted to be in this fight because it's about freedom and democracy in the world. Donald Trump, always people say he sees the world as transactions, as a businessman, not as a battle of ideology. And that is the missing link, if you like. Yes, American presidents have said that for a long time. Where are your francs and your Deutschmarks and your British pounds? Long before the euro was even invented. What Donald Trump's saying now is, where is the cash? But if the cash doesn't come, I'm not going to do this because of philosophy.
Okay. So we had some questions. We gave some answers.
We had a lot of wanging on as well.
We did a lot of wanging on, which is, I don't deny that. We did. We wanged on.
We did.
And so that is the end. Please keep us on the straight and narrow by getting in touch with us. Newscast at bbc.co.uk.
And we'll be back tomorrow. What are you doing tomorrow? We've both got Pat McFadden. What else have you got?
Well, it's going to be very...
What you got?
It's going to be very sunny.
Oh, lovely.
So we're going to go... Monty Don's going to be in his garden for us.
Oh, is he bringing his dog?
Well, I hope so, yes.
Excellent.
And also, we're going to talk to the playwright James Graham about the newly rewritten end of Dear England.
Oh, lovely. Ask him about his new exciting project about the Royal Bank of Scotland blowing up.
I certainly will. What about you?
We have got Penny Mordaunt, used to be Defence Secretary, Chris Philp, who's Shadow Home Secretary, and also the historian Dan Snow.
Well,
Monty Don and Dan Snow, that's like a nice breakfast party, isn't it?
I think what we say, it's a choice of listening and viewing.
Do you not watch? Don't all newscasters watch one and then listen to the other, or
I don't
listen
want
to one
to know
and
the
then
answer
watch the other?
I prefer to live in ignorance. I wouldn't want to have the proof. But we do say thank you for listening to Newscast, and we will be back tomorrow.
We will. See you then.
Newscast from the BBC.